No Cap Fund presents The Representation Station. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are live again with The Representation Station. I am your host, Jeff Mayhew, and I'm here with my wonderful crew, Roger, Scott, our treasurer, and Walter Clapp, our president. We have a very special guest from Fix Our House today, the executive director of Fix Our House, Dustin Wahl. Dustin, thank you so much for joining us today.
How's it going, guys? Happy to be here.
So before we get started, let's go around the horn and introduce ourselves a little bit more in depth. Roger, would you mind starting us off tonight?
Good evening. I'm Roger Scott. I earn my living as a CPA. I'm married forever, have 2 adult children, and watch too much news, and I'm madder than a wet hen. Stop there.
Walter, tell the people a little bit about yourself.
Hey, everyone. I am Walter Clapp. I'm the resident lawyer, co-founder of the No Cap Fund and the Representation Foundation. Happy to be here with you. I grew up in Texas, spent a brief early childhood in France, returned to the United States, went to law school out in D.C., Georgetown, spent some time on the Hill trying to figure out if we could save our nation's electric grid, and figured out that the problem, it turns out, resides in Congress. That brings me to you, and all the way from Laramie, Wyoming, where I currently reside. I practice law in the states of Montana, Wyoming, and New York. And I'm kind of obsessed with defining representation, what makes it good, bad, indifferent, and trying to find a path towards a lasting United States for my kids, grandkids, great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandkids. And I'm worried about China. I'm just going to focus there. China, AI. I always go back to it, and you'll hear me talk more about it. But hopefully we're going to find some solutions here tonight with our great guest, Dustin from Fix Our House.
Dustin, you're up next. Tell the people a little bit about yourself.
Happy to be here. I'm Dustin. I'm the executive director of Fix Our House, which is an organization that does advocacy for electoral reform generally and proportional representation specifically in Washington, D.C., where I live. I'm originally from South Dakota, where I grew up until I was 18, and I went back to that part of the country last year to work as communications director for Dan Osborne, who's an independent Senate candidate in Nebraska. We came up a little bit short, but put on a good fight. I'm back in D.C. I've been at Fix Our House for 4 years, just took leave to do that. And I'm back in the role at Fix Our House. So excited to talk to you guys.
So I'm going to introduce myself, but before I do, could you just, our audience is very familiar with representation as we talk about it, about uncapping the House, but you guys have something a little bit more unique, proportional representation. Why don't you go ahead and just give a basic explainer for the audience so they can understand as we get through the conversation tonight?
For sure. Yeah. So proportional representation is just a name for any system where a party's share of the vote determines its share of seats in the legislature. That's it. If that sounds like common sense and like, well, of course, that's how it should work, I have bad news. That is not how our system currently works. We have a winner-take-all system where you just have to get more votes than the other side in order to win a seat. So, this leads to, one side gets 51% of the vote, they get the whole seat, 100% of the seat. The side that gets 49% of the vote gets nothing, right? So in a place like Massachusetts, they have 9 representatives in the House in Massachusetts, and they're all Democrats, right? And you hear that and you may think, well, that makes sense because Massachusetts is a liberal state, so they're all Democrats there. But there's a ton of Republicans in Massachusetts. In fact, about a third of the state or more consistently votes for Republican candidates. But those Republicans don't make up a majority in any one district. And so they will never have a shot even at getting a Republican member of Congress there, or very rarely will. And even then it'll be like 1 of 9, right? all of New England actually is Democratic, and there's not a single Republican representative from New England. You have the same problem in a place like Oklahoma, right, which has five representatives. They're all Republicans, even though there's a lot of Democrats in Oklahoma. So a proportional system is one that uses a couple different methods, either multi-member districts, where, say, Massachusetts would have five representatives all running in one district and four all running in the other, and that allows you to elect people in proportion to their party's amount of support. So Republicans be able to get some seats in a place like New England, Democrats be able to get seats in the middle of the country, and this is also what would make it possible to have more parties in the U.S. So there's other reasons why we think it's a crucial reform to be looking at right now, but I'll stop there, and we can take the conversation elsewhere.
Yeah. So thank you for that. I know that it's something new. And if for those of you that listen, you can go to their website, fixourhouse.org, right?
Yes, fixourhouse.org. That's the place, and we're on Twitter as well at @fixourhouse. I guess X is what we're calling it.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And you guys have a great video on there that does an explainer about this. I think Vox produced it, but it's really great. So I think it's like, I don't know, 7 or 12 minutes. It's worth your time to sit down and watch so you understand. Like I tell people, representation is going to be the most talked about political topic for the next 10 years, whether you are aware of it or not. So you better just get used to it now and start educating yourself, because there's lots of different perspectives on how to do this. So anyways, I'm Jeff Mayhew. I'm the host. I'm a father of five. I'm a small business owner. I don't know. I got into politics about 5 years ago, shortly around the COVID time. I had a little time to start reading and educating myself, and I was volunteering for a couple of political campaigns, and I kept asking people, "What do you think is wrong with our government?" And the answer I got overwhelmingly was Congress. But they also didn't believe that anything could change. So that sent me on a mission. I picked up some books, I read some more, and this one word kept on coming up, and that word was representation. So that led me here. I met Walter, I met Roger, a whole bunch of other people. We've got the No Cap Fund started, and we're trying to just spread the word about representation to help average, everyday citizens understand this, because it sounds complicated, but it's really not. And it is something that I think, we need to make fundamental change to the system, and people need to be involved in that change. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So, again, thank you all for joining us tonight. So, everybody have a good week. I know Roger just loves the news cycle. I sent Dustin an email. I said, I'm going to write some questions about the news cycle. And then I read the news cycle and I said, nah, I'm not going to write questions about the news cycle. It's too depressing.
So many exciting things happening all the time.
Yeah. So let's start with the basics. Why? And Dustin, I'm going to have you go first on this, if you don't mind. Why
Sure.
is Congress broken?
That is a whole can of worms. And what do we have? An hour, 3 hours? I think that it's probably best, in my opinion, to talk about this in two ways. Congress is first broken because we don't use it the way that it's supposed to be used, because executive power has increased so much over the last several decades. And this is what, look, I have my political ideology. I have, my beliefs about politics, but this is also just a pretty consensus view in political science that, Congress is Article 1 of the Constitution. It's supposed to have the lawmaking power. It's supposed to be, the basic center of the government, and it has ceded a lot of that power over the years to the executive branch and the judicial branch. So I think that's the first reason, honestly, that for lots of reasons, it's gridlock being a big one of them. It's been easy for people to demand big change, and then Congress isn't able to deliver on those changes that the public wants. The executive branch does instead, or tries to, and that's, I think, a very big problem. I think the second thing that goes very closely hand in hand in that is something that our work tries to more directly address, which is that Congress is increasingly polarized on partisan lines. We used to, we've had a two-party system in the United States for a long time, but really we've had something more like a four-party system for most of our history, especially in the last century, where you had liberal Republicans and conservative Democrats and a lot of crossover. If you look at a polarization map of Congress, you'll see that it makes kind of a Y shape in the last 20 years or so as the two parties pull further and further apart. And this is because there's increasingly few competitive districts, thanks to geographic polarization, Republicans and Democrats increasingly living in different places. So you have only a few districts that determine control the House, and all of these other representatives are just representing a district that is really blue or really red and not that competitive. And so they answer to those voters and those interest groups. And that leads to gridlock and a lot of difficulty getting much of anything done. And to the doom loop, as you just saw you holding up Lee's book. Lee Drutman, one of our co-founders, wrote a book called Breaking the Two-Party Doom Loop about this problem. And the doom loop is where, the parties polarize because they're responding to some issue, and they get more extreme because they're answering to their base, and then they see the other side as a growing threat, so they cut themselves off from the other side, and then conflict worsens, and then the cycle just continues and continues and continues, and we're in the middle of that cycle. And so I think that's my best diagnosis of why Congress is broken. I think those two problems are very closely interrelated.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I'm going to go to Roger. Roger has he lives in a different perspective, right? He's a CPA. He's not in Washington D.C. Roger, from your perspective as a voter, as a citizen, why is Congress broken?
Well, I mean, there's several reasons. Just sort of at a big picture level, the institutions have remained frozen and sort of unyielding despite, sweeping demographic and changes in the society. Not the least of which is just the size of the population, but the education level has increased so much, and these inflexible institutions now overlay that on top of this growing urban rural divide and some of the other polarization Dustin was just talking about. You overlay them on top of that, and we end up with perverse incentives for people who are elected. They appeal to their constituents' worst impulses, right? And there's a lack of accountability is another thing why I think it's broken. Just something as simple as um, Warren, Warren Buffett's rule that he proposed for the budget, right? If your budget is 3% off, you're not eligible for reelection. That kind of accountability would go a long way toward fixing what's wrong with Congress. And they're just those guys they're so out of touch with the average constituent's lived experience. Simple example: healthcare, right? They don't understand anything about how difficult it is to get quality healthcare at affordable price because they've got this, their own plan. That alone, mon Dieu, how can they relate to what we're going through? So those are some of my ideas.
Walter, you've got, you're in Wyoming, so you're further west than any of us, right? You're as far away from DC as any of us right now, right? You're also a lawyer and you've also worked on the Hill. From your perspective, why is Congress broken?
Congress is broken for two reasons. One is the 1929 Permanent Apportionment Act, and two is a lack of converging facts that are breaking the human mind. I was talking to a young man earlier today who basically has given up trying to decide what is real and what is not. And without facts, without a verifiable reality, Congress can get away with whatever they want. And so that's my take.
Yeah, so I'm going to go back to a little bit what Dustin was saying. He mentioned that the executive power. Obviously, that's a big problem. Congress has ceded a lot of its authority, and across the political spectrum, left, right, and center, they all pretty much agree. There's 3 or 4 books over there to my right, maybe it's your left when you're looking at it, written by Patrick Deneen, Osita Nuwale, I'm probably mispronouncing that, I'm sorry, and Yuval Levin, right? And in all of those books, they have different perspectives, but they all kind of draw the same conclusion. And that is that Congress isn't doing its job. It is ceding its power to the executive branch. And I also have to mention, they all support increasing the size of the House, right? Because that would empower the House to actually act. And you mentioned about the gridlock, Dustin. And I think, a lot of people see the gridlock as a feature, not a bug. But in Ezra Klein and Ben Shapiro, or Ezra Klein had Ben Shapiro on his podcast recently, and they were discussing this, and Ben was taking the position that it's a feature, and Ezra was kind of pointing out they were talking about the filibuster. And his point was because the gridlock is so bad, it causes people to take side streets, right? Because that's what happens at gridlock. Traffic doesn't stop, people find ways around it, right? And so, but the problem is the gridlock is so bad that all of these side streets are overwhelmed and maybe people are cutting new paths that shouldn't exist, right? And so I think, ultimately we need to increase the size of the road. We need to add more lanes, so we can, there's still going to be gridlock. There's still going to be slowdowns, but we can at least get to where we're going. We have to take a side street here and there. That's okay, but it doesn't overwhelm the neighborhoods living to the side. So, I agree, with pretty much most of everything that Dustin said and the group here is like, why is Congress broken? Because they're not doing their job. They're just not doing their job. There's no incentive for them to do their job, and there's no accountability for them to do their job.
I agree with that. I would jump in and say that first of all, I didn't know Patrick Deneen supported House enlargement. That's exciting and promising. But yeah, I heard that interview as well, and I don't disagree entirely with what Shapiro was saying. Like, yeah, gridlock is absolutely a feature of A, what the founders wanted, and B, what has in some cases worked well in Congress's history. But it's clearly not right now. And yes, it's ceding a lot of power over to the executive to get anything done. I don't have a good I don't have track of how many bills have passed this year. It's low. We keep competing against the most recent previous year to set the record for the most unproductive Congress in history.
Mm.
I think they'd passed 6 bills up through like May or June of this year or something like that. So I had to roll my eyes a little bit when Ben said that, because it's just like, yeah, you're right, but like only in theory. You know what I mean? Look at the world around you.
Yeah, I don't have the number of bills passed, but I believe that the number of executive orders is like 198, and that's a big problem, right? I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah, we keep out competing the previous administration on that one too. Yeah,
right. So now this is a similar question, and but why is Congress broken? Like, are there specific things that you can pinpoint in history that have broken it? Walter kind of pinpointed one of them that we all agree on in his answer before. But Dustin, what's your take on that?
and I would agree with that too. I think that that keeping the size of the House in closer relation to population growth would have been good. Put in a plug for when we stopped being able to adopt proportional representation. That was formally in 1967. A law was passed, actually a very well-intended law, the Uniform Congressional District Act, which was passed just to make sure that states did not elect all of their representatives in the same district. With plurality voting rules, the same kind of voting rules that we use now, because if you think about it, that would allow a state to, 50% of the vote, 51% of the vote would get a party all of the seats because they'd all be running in the same district. And so, they'd all get across the finish line that way. And it was used by some southern states to kind of try to prevent black districts, black areas from getting representation. And so it was a good idea. That's kind of the ironic part about the way that we do elections. Single member districts are more proportional than electing everyone just at large with plurality voting rules. Like the system we have is better, more proportional than that. But the most proportional system is one where you go a step further than that, several steps further than that, really. It also goes very well with the House increase. In fact, I think that we have to enlarge the size of the House if we're going to get to a proportional system. So I think those things go hand in hand, and maybe we can talk more about that later. But I think that would be one as well in the 60s. Plus, there have been other turning points in Congress's history. The 90s, the Gingrich revolution was, everyone points to as a turning point for Congress, whether you like him or not, like what he did. That was a moment when Congress really was weaponized by the Republican Party to do total political war. The Democrats certainly responded in kind, and we've kind of been in an escalation war ever since. I think you can point to the Obama era as a similar one. Yeah. What do y'all think?
Yeah, Walter, you want to jump in here?
Well, I just, it's unclear to me what is the difference between proportional voting and like a multi-member district, county commissioner election like I have here in Wyoming. And I suspect some of our listeners are confused as well. And I recommend that they go watch videos and other things, but maybe if you could just give it a shot at kind of breaking it down for us.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. So, there's a difference between plurality voting and proportional voting. Both of them could use multi-member districts. I'm from South Dakota, where their state house has 2 representatives in each district, and that's a multi-member district. But both of those are basically separate elections. Like get 51% of the vote, you get a seat. In a proportional system, you say you're in a multi-member district, and you have 5 members in one district. In that system, you don't need 51% of the vote in order to win, or the plurality, which would be like just the most, how you can win an election with like 48% of the vote because no one else got more than you. In a multi-member district that's proportional, 20% of the vote would get you one of those seats. In a 5-member district. So it allows the minority party to have some representation, which, the majority party in the state might not like, but the minority certainly does. And we live in a country where, we have a lot of Republicans in blue areas still, and a lot of Democrats in red areas. When we look at a map, we see blue states and red states, but really everything is some shade of purple, and it's weird that we have a 2-party system. Like it's not it's not normal that a country as large and diverse as ours would just have 2 camps that are pitted in this death match against each other. There's more than 2 ways of viewing the world, but we have that system because of the way that we do elections. There's a law of political science called Duverger's law, which says that if you use single-member districts and you use plurality voting rules, which is what the U.S. does, you're going to end up with a 2-party system because of the spoiler effect, basically. Like, I think we're familiar with that. Like there's, if a third party tries to charge into some district or state and try to compete there, they'll just hurt the party that's closest to it. They'll take votes away from that and risk handing the election to the other side. So that's the big difference is, it allows a party to win some representation, even when they're not the majority.
So I'm hearing 2 things. One is multi-member districts are necessary for proportional voting, but not sufficient. You can have multi-member districts that are not proportional. And also proportional voting is, or at least in the way you conceive of it, or your group conceives of it, is going to be based on, you're going to be voting for a party, not a candidate.
You could do either, though, right?
Yeah, you could do either. And most, I think it would be unrealistic for in America to move to elections where you're just voting for a party. Um, some countries do that, but most proportional countries, this is about 80% of the world's democracies. In fact, I just want to say that the only reason that we use the election system we use is because we're such an old democracy. And proportional voting didn't exist when the U.S. became a country. Jefferson proposed an early model of it one time in his writing, but we use the inherited British electoral system that's ancient, and for the most part, among major democracies, only former British colonial nations still use winner take all, first past the post plurality voting. So it's we just need a second American Revolution, basically. But the way this normally works is your vote for a candidate is also a tacit vote for that candidate's party. Basically, the ballot has to in some way inform how, like, what percentage of the electorate is voting for one party versus the other. So you have to have some kind of party vote indicator. But actually, not to complicate it too much, but the first thing you said also is I think you said that multi-member districts are necessary but not sufficient. That's true in many systems, but I actually think the best system that probably is most realistic for the United States, and this is new. We support kind of any proportional system, but I genuinely think that the most likely one that we could adopt is the German system or the New Zealand system, and they still use single member districts. So this would allow us to keep 435 members in their districts, and then also increase the size of the House. Say you add 200 new representatives, but those representatives then represent their state at large. So you know how you have some city councils, city local governments that like have at large and also district representatives. This would be like that, and those at-large reps would be chosen from the party list. So voters would go in and they'd vote for their preferred candidate and they'd vote for their preferred party. That party, list would compensate for disproportionality in the district vote. So if a party, like in Massachusetts, the Democrats win all of those 9 districts, but they have 5 new at-large seats. Those at-large seats, 4 or 5 of them would go to the Republicans to even out for the disproportionality in the district vote. So I think that'd be the cleanest way to do it, because you allow everyone to keep the districts that they have now. That's a big political hassle to, increase redistrict everywhere and to do all that. So I think that would be the way to do it. And, no matter what, we got to enlarge the size of the House if we're going to do this, in my opinion.
So, Roger, you want to jump in here? I know we're kind of a little sidetracked, but the original question was, how is Congress broken? Feel free to answer that one or continue this conversation, because this is fantastic. I just want to get you an opportunity to get in here.
Well, the static legislature is a risk for the republic, for any republic, including ours, even before the turbocharging of what we've been seeing over the last 20 or 30 years. It was the static legislature has been a risk since 1911, 1929. Pick your endpoint. But the question was, how is Congress broken? So the House is what it is, and I focus on that a lot. But the Senate's a bigger problem, in my opinion, but it's also a heavier lift. The way to fix that, I don't see a way to fix it, but it's heavily counter-majoritarian, right? And it allows for the minority to consistently thwart the will of the majority. I mean, examples abound everywhere. The Electoral College to start with, and then just the raw exercise of power in a situation like McConnell and Merrick Garland and Coney Barrett. Those sorts of things. That's counter-majoritarian. Then they end up overturning Roe v. Wade, which the population does not support. So, situations like that where minority rule is, we don't have minority rule, but we're closer to it than we should be. The minority has too great a say in how things are done or not done. And I think that's the bigger problem. And it shows up in the Senate, both in its design and the filibuster.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's definitely some issues with the Senate. I don't necessarily agree with all of that. I do think, the Senate overall, it's supposed to, kind of represent, um, you know, a different part of the country. I look at the House as like the people, right? And I look at the Senate, it's obviously the states, but it's like the aristocracy, right? And then the executive is kind of like the king, right? But it's all these powers are divided. They're supposed to be, equal and checking each other. Fundamentally, I think how is Congress broken? Congress is broken because we never established naturalization for people coming into the country. We never, why did we have the Civil War? There was a disproportionate amount of power tipped towards the Southern slaveholders, right? You're talking about that minority power, right? Well, that was the slaveholding power in the South, and they were able to advance their
Hmm.
causes because they had an imbalance of power. Now, we balanced that with the 14th Amendment. We gave rights to the freedmen. However, the one thing that we've never done is establish a pathway for rights for people entering our country and enforce that structure so everybody that comes into the country gets rights, because ultimately, like, that's what we want. We want, if you're going to invite people in here, you need to give them the rights to protect themselves. It's both harmful to the people that come into the country and to the people who are already here when you don't have a clear and concise way for people to establish themselves as Americans. And I think, you know look at the Trump's first administration. I wrote it about it in The Hill. He wanted to put a census question on there. If you go back to the Permanent Apportionment Act, which I've got the debates right here.
A
And
citizenship question on the census is
yeah,
what Jeff was talking about.
yeah. And so he said, this is Mr. Browning. And this is at the end of the debates on June 10th, before they passed the Permanent Apportionment Act. He said, the fight began over an amendment providing for taking the census of the aliens who are in the United States unlawfully. Right? That's where the fight began. It began because of immigration. As we mentioned before, the influx of population caused, disruption in power. It was swinging from rural to urban. There were all these different variables, but ultimately, and I've got that book behind me, City of Dreams, which is just fantastic. I'm about halfway through it right now, and it gives like the whole context of immigration in America. And there's a lot of people that are kind of anti-immigration, but what I would say is, like, we are immigrants. Like, we're all immigrants, and we all, built this country together. And we really should be working towards finding a solution to people, again, who want to be here, who want to follow the rule of law and be part of the system, to give them rights. And, you know, we need to uncap the House. We need to fix the Permanent Apportionment Act, but we also need to recognize why it happened. And we need to find a solution for that. Otherwise, I think what happens, and you read about it, political bosses in the progressive era, they used people who didn't have rights as political pawns to gain power. And they tipped the balance of power in their favor. I think, Roger, when you're looking at that majoritarian, you're looking at the Senate, you're saying that's the problem. However, I think it's the fact that we don't have a naturalization process for immigrants. If we're going to have people here, they need to be able to have rights. They need to be able to vote and participate in the system, so they're tied to the country. So ultimately, and I'm still studying, I'm still learning, but I think that's really how Congress was broken, because it becomes a battle for power instead of a responsibility to serve.
Preach.
I'll just jump in and say I'll refine my response and say that Congress was broken because they failed to live up to the definition of representation, which is two-way education. And instead, they offloaded that responsibility to both the executive branch, but also to the press. And so people have been relying on other institutions to educate themselves, and those institutions have broken down. And so now we find ourselves with no institutions which we trust to educate us, and hence kind of my original comment that I'm meeting young men who don't know what's up, right, sideways.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'll put, I think you're right overall. I do think that there are other places to find truth in the world, God, family. like to help balance those things. And that's where I would direct that young man, maybe not look for the government to solve your problems. You know, but I understand where you're coming from. I'm not, I'm just saying.
Well, certainly that is true. And then at the same time, there are certain questions which do require, I think, a response from our government. I mean, we do need cohesive truth around issues like COVID, January 6th, um, just to name a couple.
Yeah, I think
Can I
I'm.
add to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, Yuval Levin, you mentioned him earlier. He's written a lot about this. Jonathan Rauch, a number of others. Like, um, one way to understand, I think, the problems that our society has at large is that institutions are very weak right now. That we practice religion, but not in church. We, practice relationship and sex, but not in marriage and family. Increasingly, we practice politics, but not in parties. All of the energy is parties are bad. We hate our party, independent. Like, um, and those moderating, and we practice learning the media, but it's on our phones now, not like where it's not filtered through a newsroom where there's editors and fact checkers and things like this. So we're diluted. Everything is flattening. Even the structure of churches, when you do go to church, are tend to the evangelical churches at least are a lot less structured. With different layers. It's like your leadership and then everybody else, right? I'm talking very generally right now, but like the point is just is not that any one of these things is so horrible necessarily on its own, but that in the kind of constitution of knowledge, to use a Jonathan Rauch term, like the way that we understand our lived reality, like those kids you're talking about, Walter, like don't have great ways to necessarily know how to figure out what's going on. There you go. There's the Rauch book. You know what I'm saying?
I'll have to add that to the reading list on the website. I read this so long ago, I almost forgot about it. Thank you for bringing it up. This was a fantastic read, by the way. I was in a coffee shop the other day, at one of my local coffee shops, and one of the owner's daughters came up to me and she's like, "Do you have any books? Do you have any recommendations on books to read about our founding? I want to understand our country better," which I just absolutely love that question. And I had a book right up, but this is actually another one that I would recommend. I'm going to recommend this to her next after she finishes the one I already sent. So,
Everything he writes is a banger.
um, okay. So we've talked about a lot of problems. This has kind of been a downer so far. Like Congress is broken. We have all these issues, and I do want to highlight something real quick is ultimately, I think some of these problems, and Dustin talked on it when he talked about the bill that established single member districts in the country, is like it was done with good intent. Often we look at the problems that we have, we're frustrated, we blame people, we point fingers, but a lot of the times these rules that are set are typically solving a problem in the moment, and they're done with good intent. It's in the future, maybe it turns into a problem, which again, I look at the Permanent Apportionment Act and the 17th Amendment, and I look at both of those things, and I think ultimately that was because of the failure of the immigration, the failure of us, managing the population as it grows and properly, and writing rules for that is why we ended up with both of those things. But again, I could be wrong, but that's my take on it. And I think that the people that were doing it were just trying to solve a problem in the moment, and it created a bigger problem for us later. Ultimately, kind of like Levin, Osita, and Deneen are talking about, is like people today have to get up off their butts and do something about it. So that leads us to our next question. How do we fix our house, Dustin? That's the name of your organization. I'm going to let you lead off with this one.
Well, I think, shocker to everyone here, I think it would involve some form of proportional representation in the U.S. Like I said, I think it also involves enlargement of the House. Those things seem really far off, I think, to a lot of people. I think one thing I'd say to that is, even if that's true, even if they're a long ways off, that that doesn't mean we can just be content with the status quo, and we need to start pushing for those things. I also think that in moments of great disruption, those often tend to be moments of great opportunity. And so, if we're nearing the kind of crisis that could get acute enough and significant enough and enough national attention to kind of create a mandate for fixing the capital D democracy problems, democracy reform is going to be in really high demand. And so I'll just say that in doing this work over the last several years, 4 years, actually, not several. Is four several or is four a few? I never know. Anyway, in doing this work for a while, like every year, the space doubles at least in terms of how many people are coming into it. Like a lot more people are focused on these big fixes right now because the problems are so bad. And so I think we've seen, I know we might get into later some specifics about members and groups that are working on this stuff, but we're seeing more interest on the Hill as well, that there are folks there that are trying to be problem solvers and indeed visionaries.
Roger, what's your
Few
take?
is only 3. Four is several. That's U.S. GAAP.
Okay, 4 is several. All right, great. Then several.
Roger, what's your take on how we fix our house?
We grow it, and we improve it, and we modernize it. And I personally would like to see it moved, but we'll go through them one by one. We have to grow it, uncap the house. That's what we're all about. I personally favor the cube root rule, but that's at a minimum. Right? I think we need that at least. Improve it. Of course, we need to cultivate higher quality candidates, and I have no clue how to go about doing that. But I think it has to do with the incentives and how do you fix the one before you, is the chicken and the egg question, right? We need better incentives to get better candidates. Modernize it. Obviously, if we eliminate gerrymandering or if we go to proportional representation, those sorts of things, that would put us more in line with modern societies around the world. And I think we need to revise the amendment process too. I've talked about it before. I think it's too onerous. Our Constitution is one of the more difficult to amend in terms of modern constitutions. And then, you've probably heard me say before, I'd like us to move the government. I think D.C. is going to be perpetually flooded in 30 years anyway. We should move it to the geographic center of the country, somewhere along the Nebraska-Kansas border, or even better, distribute it. Make it harder for adversaries to target. Put it in various places around the country. All of these things would contribute towards the feeling, the vibe of modernizing and improving our government. And, as far as moving the capital, I think they're moving the capital of Indonesia right now. They moved the capital of Brazil, 40 years ago or something. You can build a new capital from scratch, carve it out of a jungle or farmland or whatever.
I don't know, man.
Tesla moved from Silicon Valley to Austin, I heard.
I don't know. I think that's some radical stuff, talking about decentralizing Congress and maybe creating like multiple Congresses across the country. I don't know. That's some crazy Jeff Mayhew stuff right there. I don't know what you're doing over there.
I'm offended now because I've given up my radicalized economist handle on Twitter because I don't want to be known as radicalized anymore. Now you're calling me a radical.
Oh no. No, I called myself a radical. All right.
Okay.
But I'm not a radical. I'm not a radical. I'm a balanced
You're
individual.
A rascal.
I'm a rascal. That is true. That's my grandfather used to call me that all the time. Walter, how do we fix our house?
I think it's certainly expanding the size of the House of Representatives. I'm not convinced on proportional representation, but I'm open to it, and I genuinely think that it's just confusing enough that I frankly don't fully understand it, and so that's on me. I need to learn more, and I need to dig in deeper to fully rationalize it in my own brain, and I think see some working examples. There's obviously, I think one of the problems is there's relatively broad semantic range of proportional representation. It can mean these different things. There are different proposals of how things could work, and I need to wrap my head around that. I ultimately think that the solution is going to lie with AI. I think AI is it's fundamentally transforming the nature of most things that we do. I think it's transforming the way our military operates, and I think that it is going to transform the way our government and in particular representation is going to operate. We already see AI bots kind of proliferating throughout commerce, often poorly, but I do see the competition between the U.S. and China as China is going to take a very top-down approach with AI. They're going to have their model with tons of data, and they're going to have one sets of weights and measures to dictate the truth for China. And I see us with an uncapped house having the opportunity to provide a kind of bottom-up consensus leveraging AI. And so in particular, the way I imagine this happening is that each member of Congress is going to be provided with a AI model that is trained on data from the Library of Congress. And but the weights and measures of that particular AI model can be tweaked by the members of Congress. And then those models can be used to cross-check each other and then promulgated out to the citizens or their constituents. And this is going to bring back a sense of truth and get rid of some of the flattening that we were talking about and creating some depth and perspective so that people can understand, quickly with a level of trust, things like proportional representation, star voting, these different kind of, I would just say, slightly less intuitive solutions that I think are reasonable, but take a level of understanding. But then also, going to issues that are more nuanced and somewhat political in nature, trying to dig into those and cross-checking, okay, here's what, Rep. Kasten's model is saying, here's what Blumenthal's model is saying, here's what Ted Cruz's model is saying. I think ultimately is it's not only necessary, but it's kind of inevitable. And so the question is, what exactly does that look like? And I think perhaps most importantly, how does that give us an advantage over some of our foreign adversaries that ultimately would like to continue to sow confusion and distrust internally? So I keep beating on this drum, right? I think AI is the elephant in the room, and every time I talk to political wonks in DC and I mention AI, their eyes kind of like light up because they're like, oh, like, yeah, it's a big deal and nobody knows what to do about it. And I think we have to give the people, I think, free models, but I think that these can be the pathways to be rebuilding trust. And so I'll shut up. That was enough.
So I've got my answer here, but I'm going to touch on something that you just said. You talked about China, you talked about AI. Historically, concentrated power doesn't last for very long because the power at the top transitions and then there's a power vacuum and typically it fractures and falls apart. Pretty much all of sci-fi tells this story. Look at there's the Star Trek Nemesis, right, about the Borg, concentrated power.
The Foundation series, Asimov, you were touting this a couple weeks ago.
Foundation, my personal favorite, Orson Scott Card. Oh my gosh, Ender's Game is like the best of all time when it comes to this. In explaining it again, if you want to understand concentrated versus decentralized power and why our system is better than their system, read that sci-fi book. It's fantastic. So, there is hope, right? Like I understand there's, on Twitter, on X or whatever you call it, there's all this talk about China and there's all this fear. And don't be afraid, right? Like we have power as individuals. We have ability. We have great citizens with, talents that can be called upon in moments of crisis to solve problems. And we have a system that allows it to happen. Now, it doesn't work the way that we want it to work, and it is flawed right now, and we need to fix it. But that's what we're talking about, and it can be fixed. The hope is not lost. And so to get to my, what do I think we need to do to fix our house is, number one, Dustin kind of touched on it a little bit. There's all these different people in the space, right? Step one is we need to start to pool our resources. They're all working for different organizations. They need to work together. They need to figure out which systems they want to empower, and they need to simplify a message, right? personally, I think uncapping the House is the first step of making all of these changes. You're going to need new people into Congress if you're going to get any of these things done. And so, like, you pull your resources, you simplify your message of expanding the House, you run candidates for office, you support them, you educate people about why this is so important. And then here's the kicker: you only need to really win a minority of seats, okay, to break the current power in Congress. You can look back in the history of Congress and you can see how effective this can be. Look at during the McKinley era with the civil rights of the Republican Party. There was the gold standard, there was the silver, the bimetallist standard, and there was civil Republicans that held a lot of power in Congress, but they were a minority. But McKinley needed them for him to get anything done for Congress. So if you can create in modern day, look at the Squad, look how they can hold how they can hold Congress hostage with just a minority of people. So if you can get a minority of, I would say 10 to 20 seats that are all supporting a simplified message of uncapping the House, you can start to sway people to your side. And you can say, look, we got to get this thing done. And then once you uncap the House, I think you have to have a constitutional era. Like, if you look at if you take and you make a timeline of amendments, there's these large gaps that happen in our history. And we're right on that precipice where we've had a really long time without any constitutional amendments. And we need to start to fix these problems. We need to, fix this one long term. We need a ratio amendment. We need to fix the immigration problem. We need probably a constitutional amendment establishing a pathway for people to get in and out of the country. We need probably to decentralize our banking system. I mean, there's a lot of people that are upset with that. We talked about it on the show with Casey Maddox about our judicial system and how, overwhelmed it is with laws. And these are all things that people disagree with. They're all things that people, may not understand. But again, if we can get to a point, if we can get from point A to point D, right? If we can take all those steps, by the time we get to point D, we have an engaged populace ready to talk about serious issues and make serious change so we can have a prosperous next 20, 30, 60 years.
Can I ask you guys if we move to the Q root rule, that's what, like 600, 700 members in the House?
693.
693.
Nearly 700, yeah.
So what, in y'all's opinion, what changes? What I support it, I agree, but like what's your summary of like what that does and how fast does it do it?
Roger, I'll let you take that first since.
Well, for one thing, it would help to re-marginalize the extremists, right? So to the extent we have, extremists on either side, they'll be representing a smaller number of people. There'll be a larger share, theoretically, hopefully, sort of in the center, closer to the center, not on the extremes. I could see, you mentioned earlier, proportional representation being necessary or at least being beneficial to promoting the development of additional viable parties. I see the same with uncapping the House, make a greater number of seats available, and libertarians can actually win seats in Oklahoma and Idaho, and Green can actually win in the Bay Area and in Madison, Wisconsin, and maybe they can only win 4 or 5 seats, but they can win seats, right? And if a few of these parties can win a total of 20 or 25 seats, now there has to be some coalition building going on. So there's just a couple of benefits that I think would happen and happen rather quickly from increasing the size of the House. I also think it would be less expensive per district for successful campaigns. And that would open the door for more people from traditionally marginalized communities, right, to have a shot at a successful congressional campaign. The diversity curve of our Congress looks nothing at all like the country. And that's part of the reason. So there's 3 responses.
Walter, you want to go next?
Yeah, I think, adding 240 members to a 435 member House, it just injects a significant proportion of new blood, right? People who, although maybe accountable to donors still, maybe accountable to the party still, are not as accountable as somebody who's been there for a long time. So it kind of addresses the entrenched problem, right? So to the extent that our problems are a result of entrenched ideologies or entrenched particular people, it injects a level of new blood that does allow potential new changes to make it to the floor. Right? You could imagine the current Epstein situation, right? Massey is pushing for 218 members to sign on to his petition to get the matter to a floor vote. You could imagine with if you inject 200 plus new people, you suddenly would, things like that would certainly pass. And whatever information comes out comes out. I don't really take a position one way or another. So I think it's an event horizon past which we can't know exactly what would happen. And one could predict, but the parties are going to make sure that they grab every single one of those seats, and the interests are so high that they really will just have it on lock. It's like, okay, that's a decent counter argument, I suppose. But at the same time, that's a lot of work, right? I mean, that is a lot of seats to hold down, and you already see, like the Tea Party, right? I mean, you already see these factions surging, or Jeff mentioned the Squad. It would be pretty easy for a relatively large faction to arise out of a uncapped House whose sole mission is structural reform, right? Whose sole mission is more seats in the House, better representation. Maybe it's proportional representation. Maybe it's star voting. Maybe it's, a different voting method that I haven't heard of yet. I think that those people will feel a level of courage that presently is not present on Capitol Hill. That's my take.
Yeah, so I mean, I agree with a lot of what both of them said. I mean, specifically about, you decentralize power, you typically push out, like Roger said, you push out the extremists, right? Because I think overall, the extremists are typically very loud, but typically a minority, right? And so when you have a minority Congress already, you have a small body, it becomes corrupted. It becomes, infected with the louder voices. Madison warned about this in Federalist Number 10, right? His solution in Federalist Number 10 to the problem of faction was more factions, right? So ultimately, by expanding the House, you are creating more factions to build coalitions around. I think 670, 700, whatever. I think you'd have positive momentum there. I think ultimately, I think the best way to do it is to double the House. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, I think by doubling the House, you guarantee that you're going to create enough space for actual constitutional era. Number two, it's a simpler message to pitch to voters. I think ultimately that's the thing that gets lost here is you have to be able to get people to vote for this, which means you have to have candidates that can run on it. And a lot of these ideas come from think tankers that study this stuff a lot, which they're brilliant and they have great ideas, but ultimately they're not the ones running for running for office. They've got to be able to explain these ideas to candidates, and candidates have to be able to explain these ideas to voters, and voters have to support these ideas. So you've got to be able to simplify the message to something that is actually tangible and possible. And, like Roger said, it's going to lower the cost of money. It's going to make it easier for voters to be engaged because now you got a smaller district. There's all sorts of different benefits for, increasing the size of the House and, helping us move forward.
Thank you for that summary. I have I think we're almost at time though, aren't we? I'm like, I want to go.
No, go ahead.
Debate this, but I would encourage y'all to add. Far be it for me to come into your all space and plug my thing too hard, but I would encourage you all to add proportionality as an ingredient. And I know that sounds like, oh, you're confusing it, you're making it too complicated, but I do think that if we were to if we added 250, 300 new members or doubled it, that's only going to hand more power to the two parties that currently exist because they get to draw those seats in most places. So it'll just make the gerrymandering problem worse. Or it will make it worse, but like you'll still be able to gerrymander most of those, or a lot of them. Or even if you don't, like in most states, even if we don't have, if we could somehow just sort of snap our fingers and solve gerrymandering, you still have like 90, 80, 85, 90% of congressional districts are uncompetitive just because of geographic polarization. Because in a lot of places, it's hard to draw districts that are fair in terms of like, partisan fairness. And so I would say it hands at least as much power to the extremes as the current system does. And it doesn't open the door to more parties because again, like if you just have to get 51% of the vote in an election, that's what keeps minority parties from being able to compete. There isn't like 250, if you map it out, that's only adding a certain number of seats to each state. California would get like 20, 30, Texas would get a bunch, but most states are getting 4, 5, 6, and your district sizes are not going to be small enough that a green or a libertarian party could win there outright. Plus, I mean, the two parties that currently exist now are going to be heavily in power. So this is not an argument against enlarging the House. I think that we have to. I think that it has the benefits that you're talking about, or I think some of them. And I think that I think it's crucial if we want to do anything else. But I think that it needs to be included in the context of proportional representation, where a party's amount of support determines its amount of seats. So that's my argument. Yeah,
and just for the number, in North Carolina, we would under cube root rule, North Carolina would go from 14 to 23, right? So we'd pick up 9 in North Carolina, just to put that in the record.
Sure. Yeah. So, hold on real quick. So if North Carolina, if we went to 870, they go from 14 to 30. Just, as a
better still,
right? But okay, so I think,
but like, does the Libertarian or Green Party make up 51% of any one of those new 30 districts?
Well, so what I'll say is a couple of things. One, and you alluded to it earlier in Lee Drutman's book, he talked about how back when the representation ratio was closer to 1 for 500,000 versus 1 for 800,000, we actually had a secret 4-party system. While there was actual 2 parties, we had a secret 4-party system that was able to build coalitions. And I think ultimately that's what we would get by expanding the House, doubling the House. Also, and then the other thing is, I think third parties just do this wrong. Okay. Back when I'm talking about, how do we get this done is pull our resources. If you're a third party, you should focus on one state. Right? Like you should focus on winning as many congressional representatives in that one state as possible, and then focus on another state that is similar, right? And build it brick by brick, as opposed to most third parties try to run a presidential candidate. They're trying to win the whole thing at one time. Now there are, candidates that run on lower levels and stuff, but that's not where a lot of the energy and the focus goes to. So again, if you don't run the presidential candidate, right? Focus on a state that you think is going to be successful and that you can win actual candidates, right? This would be the same advice I would give for anybody in a reform movement: is find a place that you can win and run there first, and then have some success, spread your coalition, teach people what you did that was successful, and then you'll grow that. And then what I'll say about proportional representation, I'm kind of with Walter. I'm not completely against it, but I do think that it has to come after uncumping the House. In my plan, pull your resource, simplify your message, run candidates, win a minority, uncap the House, and then you have a constitutional era. I think proportional representation happens in the constitutional era. I have third graders right now. In second grade, they learn addition. In third grade, they learn multiplication. Multiplication is doing addition over and over again, right? You have to understand addition before you can do multiplication. I think you have to expand the House before you're going to get to proportional representation. You have to get people talking about representation, what it means to them, how it's supposed to work, and then you can move to a more complicated system. And that, may be better, right? It may be more efficient, right? But I think you have step 1, step 2.
I think they could happen at the same time. I'm not opposed to them arriving in the same bill. I just personally, I'm just being honest. I have a day job. I'm spending a lot of time, working on client matters, and it doesn't make sense to me yet. And I'll just say it's my own fault, right? But I'll just say right there,
No, it's not.
There are several hundred other million people where it's a more difficult concept to grasp than we need more people to do the job, right? And again,
True.
I can get there, I think, and one of the questions that I had was like, show me where it's working, right? Like, show me like exactly where a proportional voting system is working. And I think you said, and I in doing a little bit of research, saw this is in 80% of other countries.
Other established democracies, not
other
other
established democracies. Okay,
Yeah.
so 80% of other established democracies use proportional voting. Like, what's your favorite? What, like, if you could point me to, like, here's the system that seems to be working the best, what would that be?
You could look at Germany as a really good example here. I think there's a lot of countries that are doing this really well, but you can look specifically at the 2025 election in Germany, where the AfD gets a significant amount of the vote. And if you look at the first place vote getter in all the districts in Germany, you see basically two colors, just like you do in the U.S., two colors, red and blue. You see there blue and black, the colors for the AfD and the Christian Democratic Party. And so you say, oh, great, it's a two-party system. But you don't have a two-party system in Germany because that's just the first place vote getters, right? Because you can elect, the minority party in places where they're not in first place, it shows the real diversity of the country. And so there's, a multi-party system over there. They have about a 6-party system. And if they used our system, the AfD, the far right party that is currently not in coalition, would be in coalition and it would be in control of the country. So you see like the kind of the rise of the far right in Europe, the kind of firewalls in these countries that have kept the far right out of coalition in most of them has been proportional representation. So
Is that similar in the Netherlands? Just out of curiosity, I'm familiar with that guy.
Yep, exactly. Yep.
Okay, so
and for the listeners, right? They're building a coalition government, parliamentary style representation. Is that?
Yeah. Normally in proportional systems, you don't have to use a parliamentary system, but normally they are multi-party systems where like there's not just one party that's in power. It's a coalition of parties. So in the U.S., you'd see like eventually you would see a Democratic Party partnering with maybe a center right kind of Mitt Romney party, or a Democratic Party partnering with the Socialist Party, or Mitt Romney party partnering with the far right party. But like you see these coalitions that speak to the realness of our politics.
All right, so Dustin, we got 3 more questions, but I'm gonna simplify them. Are you cool to hang out just for a few more minutes to finish this out?
Sure, I'm the one that made this take a while by coming at y'all. So
no, this is great. This is exactly what we want on the show. So I appreciate the questions. All right, so I'm gonna ask this just to Dustin. If Roger or Walter, so just so you're aware, and I'm gonna combine the question is what politicians and what non-politicians are leading in this reform era? Can you just like share with our viewers, like, who should they be looking for to follow and listen?
Yeah, that's a great question. Exciting thing in Congress right now is that on the Democratic side, the House, the Congressional Progressive Caucus has endorsed the Fair Representation Act, which is a bill to do proportional representation everywhere in the U.S. It's not a bill that I think would be the best version of this, but but I think it would be a good idea. And that is Jamie Raskin and Don Beyer. It's Don Beyer's bill. There's a number of other co-sponsors, and the entirety of the CPC, the Congressional Progressive Caucus, has endorsed it, which is the largest caucus of Democrats. Okay, so that's the left side of the Democratic Party. On the far right side of the Democratic Party is the Blue Dogs Caucus, that represent more moderate districts, and they support a bill that Fix Our House helped them with, the Select Committee on Electoral Reform that we introduced. They introduced last year, then again earlier in this Congress. And that is a bill that would just create a select committee to study things like House enlargement and proportional representation and other electoral reforms. And they're supportive of multi-member districts, of proportional representation, and of House enlargement. So, you've kind of got the Democratic Party sandwiched right now. The right end of the caucus supports this stuff, and the left end does as well. And so that's really important for, like you said earlier, kind of in a moment when there is a possibility of major reform happening. We've got some of the key voices you would need to have in place to do it. There are also Republicans that support this. The Manhattan Institute, where Christopher Rufo works, a very conservative place, has written a lot about the importance of proportional representation. Some of the other kind of leading thinkers on the right, R Street Institute and some of those other think tanks have, come out in support of this. I think the situation on the right now is tough because no one wants to do anything that could possibly cross Trump. And so there's just not really, it's just not a good environment for like generating ideas and policy changes. But there are Republican offices that just care about making things work better. And I'm confident that we can get some support there eventually as well. But so Jared Golden, Marie Gluskamp Perez are two Blue Dogs that have been great to work with and really care about this stuff a lot. And then, Fix Our House, where I work and Lee Drutman works, is focused on this full time. Protect Democracy is another really important organization that's very supportive of electoral reform. They are doing this series of studies along with New America and some other places that look into these changes around proportional representation and House enlargement. Did a study on, I think it was called like, where would we put them all? Which is like functionally, where do new members go if we do increase the size of the House? It's so ridiculous when I'm on the Hill. I don't need to be rude to people, but like the number one, whenever we talk about a House increase, the number one question I get from offices is like, well, we only have 3 buildings here. Like, where do we put it's like, guys, that's the dumbest. We can figure that out. Like, that's so easy to figure out. But
that is learned helplessness at work right there.
Yeah, that's like, we can figure that one out.
Put them in Trump's ballroom.
Yeah, right. Yeah, they're building stuff across the street, guys. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so real quick, to your point, Protect Democracy that you mentioned, they've got wherewilltheyallsit.org, which explains, all the different possible solutions to that problem. And you're right, it's a simple problem to solve. Build more buildings.
Yeah, can you believe it? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, those are some of the key players, I would say.
Yeah, I think we've mentioned a lot of those people on the show before, and I would encourage anybody out there listening, like, even if you're a Republican, right? Like I'm a conservative, I'm a Republican. I listen to those people, right? I pay attention to them. I support them. I don't really care what party you're for. I care if you're working to like do your job. Like Walter said before, representation is two-way education. It's two-way information. Your job is to listen to your constituents and to inform your constituents. And then you're to go act on behalf of not just your district, but the whole country. Right? Like you have this duality to represent, and it is a difficult job. I have no doubt. And, something that we touched on in the last, segment, and you kind of mentioned, a lot of these people are new. Jared Golden's young. Marie Gluskamp Perez is young. And if you look at Congress, you see a generation of leaders leaving and a new generation of leaders coming in. And the new generation of leaders coming in, do want to reform the system. There's this, back to, a lot of people feel like there's no hope. A lot of people feel like they're powerless to make change. And what I would say is there is hope. There is people out there working to make things better. You just gotta maybe look under a different rock, support a different person, get outside your box. We're all trapped inside media bubbles. It doesn't matter how hard you work to get outside your bubble, the algorithms trap you, you know? And so like there's possibility out there. And that's gonna lead me to my last question for the night. Is and I'm gonna let Walter go first on this one because I don't think he's gone first on any of these. What type of leadership is it going to take to make generational change in our government?
Leaders that listen and are willing to accept and acknowledge when they were incorrect.
Roger, you want to go?
Oh, well, it's going to have to be somebody rational, right? We can't have people engaging in magical thinking. We got too much of that going on right now. Selfless, of course, but that's such an ambiguous term. I hate to even say it, but someone's got to be committed to not staying in power forever. They got to have a path to go do something else after they've made their contribution. And that's kind of the last point I'd make is I need leaders to understand that they do not need nor can they fix it all themselves. They shouldn't try to. That's what a democracy is. Right? You do your bit and everybody else has to do their bit. I think it's foolish to try to fix it yourself, and to praise someone trying to do that is idolatry. So we need someone who has who's a rational thinker and has a strong sense of their place in the bigger picture of the human race, let alone America, but the human race.
Dustin, you want to go now?
Yeah, I agree with that for sure. I also say I think there are some very good and very smart people in Congress. There are also some very dumb and very bad people in Congress. But I think ambition is one, like, yeah, the founders assumed that we would keep having really ambitious people in Congress that, would, so much so that like the conflict wouldn't be between, two sides of some issue or nationalized. It would be between people competing in smaller areas and stuff. And the Senate competing, checking the House and blah, blah, blah. Like, we need leaders that are bold enough to zoom out and look at these big problems and say, you know what we need for a big problem? A big solution, not just, not just the easy thing. And so I think it's going to take ambition. I think, members like Golan and MGP have some of that. Mom Donnie, whatever you think of Mom Donnie, I know a lot of people hate Mom Donnie, and I get it. He's a socialist, but like he's a socialist, but he has ambition. Like he is trying. He's taking big swings at stuff. When I worked for Dan Osborne in Nebraska, we used the line "break the two-party doom loop," which we just ripped from Lee. He didn't mind the name of his book, but it worked really well. It resonated a lot. It turns out people hate the two-party system, and if you can say there's a thing we can do that Congress can just pass with a law that would effectively lead to the end of two-party gridlock, that turns out that's pretty popular with people. It takes a bold person to say it because it's a big change, like we're talking about. Lots involved, but I think that's what we need is boldness in our leadership too.
Yeah. So I agree with pretty much everything you guys said. What I'll say is I'll plug myself here. You go on my Substack. I wrote pretty much what we need, or at least my perspective of it, in a post last week. A time for choosing, right? And ultimately, it comes down to we need leaders to follow, but we also need people to step up to follow them. We need people to be engaged. And to Roger's point about leaders that are rational, I completely agree. We need leaders that are rational, and we need leaders like Dustin said that are bold and ambitious. But I think the element here that is really important is we need emotion too. A lot of the rational leaders are typically a little bit less emotional. It's harder for them to draw a crowd. It's harder for them to win an election. And, I talked about this on my What the Book podcast with my friend Craig T. Stewart about when we were diagnosing crime and punishment is like there's this element of uh, human nature where you can be extremely rational and get led down a really bad path. Like I like to use who was the bad guy in the Avengers movie that wanted to kill half the population? What was his name? Right? Like it's an extremely rational solution to a problem, but it's not really the best solution to the problem. And you can be too emotional and also snap and, commit murder, right? Like you need some balance. You need people that are both rational and emotional so they can both solve problems and win elections. And back to the point, you need voters to step up and be engaged. And in order to do that, you need a simplified message to get them to the table. So, and then I think the biggest missing element, and this is overall it's a generational decline. We need to read, and we need leaders who read. And you all those books behind me. There's one common thread with all of the people that were very successful leaders. You got Martin Van Buren, Ronald Reagan, James Madison. They read like crazy. They were all ferocious leaders. And when they were put in a position where they had to make difficult decisions, they had all of this foundational information that was already built up to help them make their decisions. They weren't able to be corrupted or pushed in a wrong direction by other people that maybe had nefarious intent because they had all of this other information to check that information. And I think that's what's really important. And since I've gotten active in politics, what I've realized is there are a lot of people out there that do read like this, and they don't feel like there is a place for them in politics. And we have to create a place for people who read to lead again. Because as my hashtags on Twitter not Twitter, Instagram for all my book posts is readers are leaders, right? And we got to start electing readers again.
Yeah, it's going to cut into my podcast time, man. I don't know about that.
Well, so you just want to elect more lawyers because we're the most voracious readers on planet Earth.
I do not consider. Look, I've read Supreme Court stuff before. It is not the same. All right.
You want us to? Oh, you would clarify. You want us to read things that are not legal decisions.
Well, what I'll say is Yuval Levin thinks there's too many lawyers in Congress. So,
read that.
It's got
nothing to do with politics. It's a brand new book by M.L. Rio. She's a family friend. Technically, she's a classmate of my daughter's when they were at Carolina. It's a novel. It's fiction. It's about she takes a deep dive into indie bands and touring bands.
Oh, Walter's got a suggestion too.
Okay,
the whole family
have you read
thing.
The Quest or the Prize by Daniel Yergin, Jeff?
I have not.
Oh man. Okay, so if you want to understand oil in America, or in the British Empire, or what's going on in the Middle East, those books, and then Thinking Fast and Slow by Kahneman and Tversky.
That's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good one.
I got that one.
Oh, this isn't going to help you understand anything. This will just make you feel good.
Oh, okay. I love it.
Well,
you'll understand. You'll understand touring musicians, but.
All right. Do you do this at the end of every show? Is like the book recs? I like that.
No.
I
We have a book rec
provocative.
section. We have a book rec section on the website, though. Yeah, this is not a bad idea. I mean,
it's a good idea.
I think you're right, Jeff. And Dustin, if you want to bring up a book, feel free.
Well, I'm looking around my room. I don't have what I'm reading sitting next to me, but
that's okay.
I have Osia's book too on my shelf, The Right of the People, which I can see over your shoulder, Jeff. Yeah. It's a good book.
I'll give another one. This is maybe a little controversial. This is a version of the New Testament by David Bentley Hart. He was Orthodox. I went to an Orthodox church for the first time this past weekend. It was a fascinating experience. I won't bore y'all with it now. But the whole split between the Catholic and Orthodox Church in 1054 is fascinating history for those looking for meaning outside of the web of politics.
I haven't read that book, but I like David Bentley Hart a lot. He's genius.
Yeah, he's solid.
So I'll make one more recommendation real quick. 1776 by David McCullough. David McCullough is one of my favorite authors, and this is it's a smaller book. It's more digestible, and I think the average reader will probably enjoy that a little bit more than the Thinking Fast and Slow. We're probably maybe the minority in enjoying books like that, Walter. But and you mentioned it earlier about a revolution, Dustin, and I think what Walter and I always said, we need a peaceful revolution. We need a reform revolution. And obviously, as we tried our best to avoid it tonight, the news cycle isn't great because of acts that we shouldn't be doing in our country, because we should solve our problems in debate, not in violence. And so I just think it's really important out there. If you're following us, we talk, we debate, we compromise. That's how we solve our problems. I get that emotions run high and frustrations can be a certain way. But again, there's a lot of peace in information, right? That, when you start to read, you start to understand how things happened and how things have gone, clarity starts to happen in your life, and you're able to maybe bring more people to the table. So I think ultimately that's where we got to go. But Dustin, we're way past an hour. I appreciate so much. This was such a great conversation. I really appreciate it. I'm going to let everybody go around the horn here. One last final parting word. Walter, why don't you start us off?
I think it is absolutely the case that when we stop talking, that is when bad things happen. And I would also just echo that when people feel like they don't have a voice, when they feel like they're not represented, that is when bad things happen. And so, to the extent that proportional representation can make people feel more represented, to the extent that that is true in these other countries, it is something that we have to seriously consider and seriously look at. Uncapping the House is simpler. There's no doubt about it in my mind. You double the number of people, you get better representation, you get more voices, and frankly, I think there's less political violence. I think that uncapping the House is the most serious, direct solution to the problem of violence, which, we managed to avoid the rest of the show. Sorry, Jeff. And but we got to look at all the solutions, all the potential solutions, and we have to focus on those, and remember to bring them up with our family and friends when they are feeling down, because these are tough times. There's no doubt about it. This is not 1987 anymore. And so I appreciate, Dustin, you being here and engaging with us. And I look forward to working with you on trying to get some of this brought to the forefront, not just in the zeitgeist of the American population, but also to the thought leaders in DC. So appreciate it.
Roger, final words?
I'm not muted for a change. I'm having violent cognitive dissonance in my own brain right now. As you know, you've heard me mention, Walter and Jeff certainly have heard me mention cube root rule before. I'm fully committed to it. And for one of the reasons is I think it is simple. And for another reason, we have, a group of peer nations we can look at that have gravitated towards that function over time. But Jeff made the point earlier. He was going through his list of steps we need to do to get people to buy into this, and simplicity is going to be important. I think the cube root rule is simple, but I'm a CPA and a college professor, so maybe I don't have the right perspective on that particular opinion. So doubling the House, I think the Wyoming rule is simple too, but doubling is a hell of a lot simpler even than the Wyoming rule. So I may have to rethink that. As much as I am intellectually committed to cube root rule, it may not be the best thing for our group to promote. So thanks, Jeff.
Well, for the record, we don't promote. We promote anything that gives more representation, right? Like,
Agreed.
We're going to get behind
Agreed.
whatever wins. And I'm just trying to push us to a winning method, right? Because I understand what it's like to be a voter and what it's like to be outside of politics. So that's kind of my perspective. Dustin, final words.
I think that's really wise, and I like that you guys just had that discussion right now, because that's what we all need to do in these spaces. It's really easy to learn your thing, and then it becomes simple to you because it's your thing, and you're like, guys, this is simple. You know what I mean? But any electoral system is complicated. I mean, try imagining explaining like the U.S. primary system as it currently exists to like an alien. Like we have 2 elections, but sometimes they're different, and like, so it's all stuff that that we should just hold humbly and loosely. And like you guys just said, Roger and Walter and Jeff, that like we should be trying to do what we can do to make representation better in this country, and all of the positive effects that comes with. So that's what we're trying to do, fix our house. Thanks for having me on, guys. This has been fun.
Yeah. Thank you so much again, Dustin, for coming on. I think this is one of, no offense to any of the other ones, but this is like the best representation conversation I think we've had on the show. Of course, it comes with somebody who's also working on a representation issue. So, I really do appreciate that. My final words are, like I said, we have power. There are answers, and there are leaders who are looking to lead. We've got to support them. We've got to find them. We've got to empower them. And if you want to support us, you can go to our website, www.y435.org.
There it is, Walter. Do it. Okay, good.
And you can learn about representation. You can learn about representation. You can sign up to volunteer. You can sign our declaration for representation, and you can even make a donation. And remember, we have to make representation new buzzword. Everybody talks about democracy, and I think that ultimately, democracy is a great thing, but it doesn't work without representation. So we need to start educating people on representation and how important it is. So again, go to our website, www.y435.org, and sign up. We appreciate it. So thank you again. Peace, love, and representation.
And representation.
Representation.
Thank you for tuning in to the Representation Station. Don't forget to visit our website at www.y435.org and sign the Declaration for Representation. And don't forget to follow us on social media. You can find us on X at NoCapFund, on Facebook, NoCapFund, on YouTube at Uncap the House, and on Instagram at NoCapFund. Thank you, and don't forget, peace, love, and representation.